Hey guys, how are you doing today? It's PE Gilbert, your blogger, writing consultant, and the author to the fantasy novella, The Sultan's Daughter. And today we are honoured to have an interview with the Amazon best-selling author and YouTube sensation, Antoine Bandele. Antoine has written many books in the fantasy genre, including Tales from Isolwan, Sky Pirate Chronicles, and T.J. Young and the Orishas, among other titles. Antoine is positive, captivating, prolific, and a jack of all trades among a number of different fields. Here is the interview. Enjoy. So tell us a bit about yourself. Where do you come from, and how did this place influence your writings?
Now, when you say where I come from, are you saying like where I live, or do you mean like where I come from creatively in my headspace?
It can be both, but generally it's the physical place.
Okay, yeah.
For a fantasy
From
author, it could be
born
anywhere.
and raised. Yeah, so born and raised in Los Angeles, California, though I did spend a year in Washington, Tacoma, the state in the US. We were stationed on Fort Lewis because my dad was in the military. Then we came back to Los Angeles and then spent the rest of my life in Los Angeles. So that's it for me in terms of like where I live. Now, in terms of like creative space, I have been in many places. So there's the writing of prose, there's the writing of comic books, there was the directing, filmmaking, that sort of a thing. Art. I remember at one point I was trying to go to like an art school. They had me to do one of those tests where you draw doodles and they tell you like, where you would go. Too expensive. All that stuff. I used to do baseball too. Like the reason I am left-handed right now is because my dad wanted me to be a left-handed pitcher because like we have a natural curveball in baseball. So that is the reason I am left-handed, not because of my own like inclination for left-handedness. But yeah, there's a lot. Like I'm pretty diverse in like all of my interests, not even just with creativity, but if my interest in certain TV shows or films or sports. Like some people are like, what, you like basketball and you also like anime? It's like, yeah, like you can like both. You know what I mean? Like you're not like segmented to just like one thing.
You sound incredibly talented in a diverse range of fields. Sport, animation, art, literature, films.
Right. I feel like I'm a jack of all trades, where I'm like not exactly a master of like any one of those things, but I'm like pretty relatively good in like most all of them.
You write in the fantasy genre, including adventure fantasy, dark fantasy, and African American fantasy. What three things inspired you to write in this genre and these subgenres?
So I would say it was one major thing and then like a collection of other things that built to it. First, it was just watching, I believe it was Game of Thrones season 6. And at the end of that, because I think it was like a long hiatus between season 6 and 7, or whichever one had a long hiatus. And I was like, oh, I would like to look up, if there is a Game of Thrones like book set in Africa, but like set specifically like in pre-colonial Africa. And I looked it up and I found a bunch of great authors like N.K. Jemisin and Nnedi Okorafor, and then Tomi Adeyemi was just coming out with Children of Blood and Bone at that time. But none of it was exactly what I wanted, like in terms of like a fantasy world, right? And so I was like, well, instead of waiting for one of these authors to like up and do it, let me just do it myself, which apparently is very common among writers, is that they typically write because they just want to read the book that has not been written for them yet. And that's how I got into it. And so I spent a year doing research for African history. Like I first did world history, and then I started getting more narrow, looking into like Nubia, and then specifically I was looking into the Kimbudu people, which is where the folklore of the Kishi comes from, which is that the first book that I came out with, which is like half man, half hyena, very similar to like a vampire kind of situation where it's a charmer, but then they change into a monster creature that like devours women specifically. So that I started with that, and then that expanded out to the action adventure, as you mentioned, with the pirate stuff, the Sky Pirate stuff, and now I'm doing a contemporary piece, young adult contemporary piece, very much in the vein of like Percy Jackson, Tristan Strong, which just came out recently by Kwame Mbalia, and Children of Blood and Bone, Harry Potter. But also, again, in the vein of an African fantasy, specifically West African fantasy based on the Orishas, which are like the gods of West Africa.
thank you for enlightening us on all of that. I consider myself to be quite well educated and I didn't know anything about this stuff. So first, thank you. And that's great inspiration that you had there. You know, you saw a gap in the market and you went for it because it's what you want to read. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, you do. You should, as any writer out there, they know this too, is that, you should be doing what your passion is leading you to. And that, that was my passion.
Most definitely. And we are very happy that you've done it. And you've done it quite prodigiously as well.
Yeah, I was actually I think for the Kishi, I was in the self-publishing book off, and I was actually a semi-finalist in that, which was really cool. And I've been like with you being interviewed right now, I've been having like a lot of podcast interviews and that kind of thing. And then being featured, I was featured on Book Riot's like, top 15 like African fantasy books. I was like, cool, this is like actually happening. Maybe I'm doing something right. A few film options have happened too. And I was like, wait, what? Like that's insane. So like it's like been going well. So I think I'm doing the right thing so far. Like I haven't screwed up quite yet.
You most certainly haven't. You sound like you're on the way to stardom. And continuing with your achievements, you are an Amazon best-selling author. Congratulations.
Yeah, that was cool.
Honestly, I mean, that is brilliant. Well done to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was a cool moment to be like, I think at one point I was actually up to next to, like, when you see your book cover next to like someone that you have been reading, for a long time. In this case, it was N.K. Jemisin, who I mentioned earlier. She's the author of Fifth Season and a few others. Most recently, The City We Became, which I still need to read. So much TBR, but very, very great author, and she's a really well-spoken woman. She also streams on Twitch. So how I have my YouTube channel, she actually also streams on Twitch, like Mass Effect and Skyrim and stuff like that. So she's cool. She's also a nerdy person who also like writes books, stuff like that. Which I mean, typically I would say goes hand in hand, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
Why do you think readers have enjoyed reading your books so much?
So beyond just the fact of like finding other Black or African diaspora peoples who identify with the book because it's like, oh, cool, it's like a fantasy that's actually depicting African culture, specifically. Even just the stories and the characters themselves. Like, for example, I know a lot of people at the end of my first book, The Kishi, really identify with Amana's plight because he's like this, pacifist monk who is dealing with something that can't be compromised with. Like, you can't just be like, oh, let's sit down in a meeting and talk out our problems, you demon, you know what I mean? Like, he has to come to terms with how to still be a man of peace, but also when to stand up and be a man of war. And that kind of theme really resonated with a lot of readers, similar to like some of my other books. The characters and some of the plights they go through, I feel like is what people identify with most in my stories, rather than just it being like, the African fantasy that we don't often get to see.
You talk about internal conflicts within a character. That is right. The best kind of character, honestly. And that definitely explains why your books are loved by so many people and why you've become an Amazon best-selling author.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. And that's also just what I like too. Like I was saying before, like you're trying to write the book that you want to read. That's the type of character that I want to read about, the kind of story I want to read about. Like those sorts of internal conflicts are so interesting to me. And that's why I do it as I do.
What 2 tips would you give an author aspiring to become an Amazon best-selling author? I can't help but think who this applies to.
Well, I actually do this quite often because I do get this message like on Instagram or email and that kind of a thing. And I always point people to my holy trinity, which is Mark Dawson, who is a thriller author in the UK as well. And then Joanna Penn, another UK author who's a great indie. She's fantastic in this space, like teaching people about marketing and all that. Same with Mark Dawson. He's really good at teaching people about Facebook ads and the importance of that. And then the other one, who's the only American on my list, her name is Jenna Moresi on YouTube. And she is just super relatable and personable. Like, I mean, I should, have warning if you don't like people who swear a lot. She swears quite a lot, but that's the reason why I love her so much, because she just goes like, she just goes in on the swear words, and it just makes her, I don't know, something I can like digest a little bit better. And someone who doesn't take herself too seriously, very comedic and stuff like that. But all 3 of them have very good value of what it means to be an indie author and how to be successful as an indie author, because it's a lot different than if you're being a traditionally published author, where most of it, or the idea is that most of it is put on the publisher for marketing, when really, unless you are, Stephen King or Rowling or something like that, you're going to have to do most of that yourself still. You're still gonna have to be boots on the ground with most of your stories. And those people in particular are very good at teaching how, because for most of us, it's easy to do the writing part of it because the creativity part comes naturally. But it's harder for most of us to put on the business hat and the marketing hat and to figure out how to get someone to read our book that we spent, so much time in and put, all of our efforts into. And they're very great for that. And I definitely suggest those three in particular.
You are also a YouTube star with over 270,000 subscribers. I mean, again, we were talking about stardom and how you're on the way to stardom before. I mean, you're already there on YouTube, it seems.
So yeah, that's very funny. I actually was on Mark Dawson's podcast, actually talking about me being on YouTube and stuff like that. And while yes, I do have 270 subscribers, they are there for a very specific kind of content. And that's like, when I'm talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender or Star Wars or Mass Effect or whatever geek thing I'm talking about that week, but they don't really all the way translate to like my book stuff. They do kind of, like there is some of my best beta readers have come from my YouTube channel and from those people, but it's like a very small number. Not like, everybody's like, oh my God, you have all these YouTube subscribers. Are they all your readers? I'm like, nah, most of them are not. Most of them are not my readers at all. They're a separate audience entirely. But it's still awesome, man, because I still can do my YouTube full time and be able to do the writing thing. It funnels into my creativity and my creative work in that it funds it, but it doesn't necessarily funnel the fans or the readers into it.
So it sounds like a win-win, to be honest. You get to be both a YouTuber and an Amazon best-selling author. I mean, what's the downside here?
A lot of stress and a lot of having to, sometimes it's easier. Like I know we always say this, that the grass is greener on the other side. So I look at people with 9-to-5s and they're like, oh man, you look like you're so great. You can do whatever you want. I'm like, but I'm stressing. I'm thinking about videos all the time, thinking about writing all the time. You could just go to your job and then turn your mind off when you come back home. Like you don't have to think about it until you step back into the office. So there's that have-see, like we're always like vying for each other's lives. We're like, but that seems cool that I can just go to a job, get paid, and know that I'm gonna get paid, and then come out of it and not think about it for like the rest of the day or the weekend or whatever it is.
You don't sound like the sort of person who can have a 9-to-5 job and forget about everything else afterwards. Wrong kind of person, mate.
No, it'd be hard for me. And I was at a retail company for 5 years where, yes, and at the end of the tail end of that, because I went full time with that retail job, my energy was very drained, right? Because I was working with people and customers who are demanding of certain things, right? So you'll come home and you're like, I don't want to do anything. Like, you know what I mean? Like your energy is completely drained. So yeah, like that's very true that, those kind of 9-to-5s can actually drain you from your creativity and going back. So yeah.
What is unique about your YouTube content that makes viewers regularly return to watch your channel?
It's very funny you mentioned that, because I just had a comment recently, maybe like a few weeks ago, where someone said that very thing. Because at first, because my channel, or at least as of more recently, it's more of like a sit down, let's just talk about like geek stuff on the couch. And at first, when he first saw my first few videos, he's like, what is this? I don't want to watch some guy like talking on his couch about like stuff. And then like later on, as he like started watching more of my videos, he's like, oh, actually, it's pretty cool. It's like I'm talking to one of my friends. Like it's like a buddy I'm talking to, versus like, this like authoritarian person's like a God voice saying like, this is what the lore is and this is what it's supposed to be. It's more of a guy just like casually going like, oh, this is why I think, Aang would beat Korra in like a fight, and like just like talking it out and it being very casual. And that's what I felt has connected with most people on my YouTube channel, is that I'm very personable, and I'm like very, or I try to be relatable. I'm not trying to be like this like all-knowing geek person who has all the answers, but more someone who is figuring out along with you as the viewer, like, hey, let's just talk about this idea. And like, I'm reaching out most of the time in the video about like, what do you guys think, like, and then having this back and forth, from video to video, versus it just being like, this is the way, and that's it.
Those explain why people keep coming back. You are relatable. You do include them in the conversation in your videos. It's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.
Coming back to your books, which character in any of your stories is the most like you? and how?
Definitely would be T.J. Young, full name Tomori Jomiloju Young. It's a book that has not released yet. I'm not sure when this is coming out, but depending on where you guys are listening or watching this, it comes in June of 2021, because we're in 2021 now. But he is, and that's the contemporary book that I was referring to earlier, my young adult novel. And it's the one that was the most easy for me to read because it's so close to my own voice versus like when I do some of the more old timey, like pre-colonial African stuff, like you have to like be in that like, mind space, and the prose has to be a specific way, or like, the characters or the technology has to be a certain way. And in this modern book, I can talk about Facebook or Instagram, or talk about basketball, and that sort of thing, or make references to Star Wars or Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. So TJ definitely is like, he's not me exactly at all, but he's definitely the closest character to me versus like, when I was talking about the pacifist monk, like I don't really relate to him on a personal level, except for maybe like the internal conflict, like that being interesting to me, that I'm not a monk who can kill demons. I'm just a dude, who likes certain things. And that's why TJ, I think for sure, from my TJ Young and the Orisha series, is most relatable to me.
Ooh, and TJ sounds like a character we should all definitely look out for in June of this year.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like that is like by far my favorite book that I've written thus far in like the past 4 years.
On a meta level, what do your stories mean to you?
On a meta level, so that's really hard because meta is meta. But I guess what they mean to me, I mean, it really is an outlet, right? Like I think for most creatives, it's an outlet. It's like when someone has a lot of emotions and they keep them bottled up into themselves, and then they let it out like in a burst in a very maybe like unhealthy way. It's better to do that, even if it's not like writing, because even if you're not a writer, maybe you do it in some different way. Maybe you are someone who likes to work out, or you go out to dance, or you go to concerts. Everyone needs that outlet just to express themselves, right? In some way, whether it's like fashion, or like I said, like going out to a concert, or conventions. Like conventions are huge for that sort of thing, where everybody can band together and kind of find their tribe. For me, it's an outlet that is very much needed for me to live my life, and also a way for me to understand the world around me. Because I feel like a lot of times when I do my YouTube videos or my books, just in the researching or going through the process of me thinking, like I find out more about myself, or just understand more about the world just by navigating that, especially with writing. Because with writing, like you were saying, you have to be very empathetic to be a writer, because you're writing from so many different perspectives, or you're dealing with so many different people. If they all sound samey, then it doesn't feel like a natural, realistic world, right? So you have to have that empathy to think like that villain sometimes, or figure out why that hero is so heroic when not all the time you feel like, I'm going to run into that burning building and like, I don't know, I'm probably going to stay outside. You have to figure out how those people think to develop, the world as it were.
Would you ever consider writing a book in another genre outside of fantasy? And if so, what genre or genres would it be in?
Is it cheating if I say sci-fi?
No.
Because sci-fi is too close, right? Sci-fi is too close. No, I'll do a real answer. So my real answer would be, and I have wanted to do this for the longest time, I've wanted to write a not a romance, but a love story. And I've recently, again, like I'm saying, when navigating the writing, you kind of figure out the nuances and differences between the meaning of words. And the difference between a love story and a romance, that, romance typically is the trope of, the meet cute, the breakup, the fallout, and then getting back together, and then the happy ending. Like you have to have a happy ending for it to be called a romance. But a love story is mostly, it's a lot of overlap, similar things, but oftentimes it's not about getting together, but it's also just learning about or growing in your love, and what it is you understand about love and that sort of thing. And that's more interesting to me. It's more like a coming of age kind of a thing, and kind of figuring out, maybe not with that partner what you want, but figuring out through that relationship, going forward, what is best for you. And there's an album that is one of my all-time favorites by Maroon 5. Their best album. They haven't made a good album since then, in my opinion. Songs about Jane, and I wanted to model a story around that, because all of those songs are about the breakup that Adam Levine had with one of his past girlfriends, which I'm assuming is either Jane, or maybe he switched the name up to be called Jane or whatever it was. And that story of the progression of that I thought was really interesting. But then I don't really write, romance or love story type, stuff, but it's something that's always been in the back of my mind. So at some point I might write that under a pen name. So that would be my answer. I would write romance or a love story in the future.
Please write it. It sounds brilliant already, honestly. You sound like you know what to put into the story that would make it really unique and interesting.
Love stories or sweet romance is something that I think I can get more behind. Or a love story type thing, like similar to what's the one that just came out with Adam Driver, a marriage story, something like that, or
About
which
divorce.
I know, which that one's about a divorce, but it is about, or even like a 500 Days of Summer, like that one isn't about him getting with it, like those types of love stories where it's not really about them getting together, but them growing and learning from the relationship. That's what's interesting to me.
If you could go back in time and speak with your younger self, a younger Antoine, what advice would you give him about the writing process?
I would say, yo, Antoine, 18-year-old Antoine specifically, who's graduating from high school, I would tell him to keep writing and don't go off the other path that you're trying. Like, because at one point I was like, I want to be a director in film because I live in LA, so it's like that's what everybody wants to do. And you're caught up in like the hoopla of that. But if I would have did it earlier, especially when the indie scene was popping off at that time, like in particular, because that's when I believe the Kindle came out. That's when KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, was coming out and all that. And a lot of those early authors who were able to get a good footing in there are now having like huge backlists and huge success that they don't really have to push for as hard as maybe a newer author does today, because it's a lot harder to break in. Similar to YouTube, like with YouTube, I was in there very early. I was on YouTube when YouTube first started. So I had my footing in there a lot easier. And I don't know if it would have been as easy if I had started today, you know what I mean, with what I do and got in. So I would definitely, 18-year-old Antoine, like, yo, just write right now, bro. Like look up Kindle and look up how you can do it. Cause that's what I was doing from when I was like 6 years old, able to write, to like elementary school. I would, actually read my stories to my friends underneath like the slides and stuff like that. And they would be like really interested in it. I won a screenwriting award when I got out of high school, and like there was all these signs that were like, "Hey, you should probably write." I would have told myself, "Yo, keep going down this path. Like, don't like detour or meander. Like, don't spend your whole 20s not doing that and developing that craft," which I'm now trying to like redevelop now.
What is the hardest part of the writing process for you? And does this issue apply to making YouTube videos as well?
Probably doesn't apply to YouTube videos as well, because for me, the hardest part of writing is the middle part of it. And I was actually literally just talking about this with my critique partner, because in other writers, I have like writing groups that I speak to and that sort of thing. And we were saying that outlining is the best, because it's so fun to be like, oh, this idea, this could be like this, and it's so great. And then the ending is great because it's already like implanted, and you're just polishing, you're making the language sound really good. You're adding extra meaning to that scene. You're putting like, cliffhangers and foreshadowing and payoffs and all that kind of stuff. But the middle is horrendous. Like discovering the story, having to writing the individual scenes that have no basis. You're just kind of writing into the dark. Like that is the worst. That's like when I'm like the down. Like literally my mood is affected by how good of a writing day I had or how bad of a writing day I had. Like literally, like it's kind of a little bit unhealthy. Like if I had a bad writing day, like literally just me not being able to put down imaginary words on a blank page puts me in a bad mood, like, and all that middle stuff is really hard for me. But for YouTube, I really don't have that. I guess YouTube for me, I guess the hardest part is the writing portion of it at the beginning, or like the scripting or the idea phase, because I like more the production stuff, like, filming it and editing it. That's the fun part for me. So it's like the flip for me on that. But for writing it, definitely outlining, the best. Finishing and polishing, the best. The middle, atrocious.
This is one of my favorite questions to ask writers. How has writing changed you as a person?
It's definitely made me a more empathetic person and just more thinking of the other, or thinking about the other side of the coin more. Because again, like I was saying before, you have to do that. And also just broadening my knowledge. Because like I was saying, like doing all that research for all the African history, a lot of stuff that I picked up that I didn't know about, or just like the nuances between, because sometimes when people say Africa, they think about just like that one entire continent, but not realizing that there are many different subcultures and subgroups within, the entire continent, or even within a country itself. Like for instance, my YA is depicting a mostly Nigerian and Benin culture, the Yoruba people. And within Nigeria itself, it has, I want to say, several hundred ethnic groups just in that one country. And And I wouldn't really have fully understood that if I wasn't researching and doing all this other stuff for my writing. So it's helped me, broaden my viewpoint of the world and then just of other people in general, for sure.
That's wonderful to hear, honestly. It is the power of writing, truly.
It is magic. Writing is magic. I think Stephen King in On Writing says it's like we have like, what do you say, telepathy or something like that. He said we have some sort of magical power just by like putting words on a paper, having someone else read that, and you're implanting your imagination to someone else's imagination. I think Brittany actually said that too in your interview with her, that she loves the idea that someone is going through her imagination as they're reading her books, right? Like, I think that idea of just that collective shared dreaming is like some Inception stuff, right? But like through words, it's like, it really is magic.
Are you writing another book at present? And if so, could you tell us a bit about it, please?
I have so many that are being written or outlined and all that. What I'm currently, like literally what I have open like behind this call right now is the one I was talking about, the YA. I'm actually finishing off and getting ready for the art copies for TJ Young and the Orishas, the Gatekeeper Staff, book 1. And that's going out. And after that, I have my third Sky Pirate book, which is going to finish off the trilogy, called For Code and Honor. And then I have another one called Midnight's Embrace, which is like, I don't know if you saw Jayla or know about Jennifer Lopez's movie Hustlers that came out, I think in 2019. Basically, it was her as a stripper, but also trying to swindle the men that she was doing with like these drugs. So I'm doing that, but with a fantasy twist. And so instead of it being like drugs in the modern world, it's like a love potion. So it's like, them using love potions. I think that's really cool because I haven't seen a fantasy that gets kind of real worldy like that, like and turning it on its head. Like you have fairies, stuff like that with love potions, but instead of it being just about like, oh, I want this person to marry me, it's like, no, we're trying to like get your money off of you kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like a hustler. Like I thought that'd be a cool idea. I have so many other like ideas for books. I had this one that I wanted based on Mansa Musa, who was the richest man in Africa. I'm basing a whole entire trilogy on that, like a fictitious one. I have this one called The Baji Prince, which is based on like the Arabian conquest of Egypt, and how that all went down, but like with a fantasy twist again. Like I'm very much like very similar to George R. R. Martin, where he used the template of War of the Roses to dictate how A Song of Ice and Fire kind of went, especially that first Game of Thrones book. Similar, I've been following very similar footsteps as him, where I'm using like real history or real regions, but putting a fantasy twist on it and making it different in that way. So there's so many like that I have, and I don't know how I'm gonna have the time to do them all, but they're there and they're in my head.
It sounds like you have a ton of ideas. All of them sound brilliant and fascinating, and you will get them done. It may not happen tomorrow or even in the next year, but fortunately, and please God, you'll have a long life and you'll be able to write them all, and we're all going to love them.
Yeah, I would hope so. I hope so. That'd be cool.
Outside of writing and YouTubing, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Video games. I refound love for video games because in high school, I actually had this whole conversation with someone else on a Twitch stream. I was what I would classify as a gamer. Like I played like almost every game. Like I was really into like everything. I was watching X Play back on the G4 channel, which is rest in peace G4 and X Play. But huge gamer then. But then in my 20s, I was just like, games aren't as fun anymore. Or I realized that I was just sharpening my focus of what I liked. So instead of like playing everything, I was like, oh, I like just this specific game, or I like just this specific creator. So I just recently started playing up some new video games like Ghost of Tsushima and Mass Effect Andromeda, which I'm so stoked that Mass Effect is coming back out. Like I'm so stoked about that. So video games definitely is like my go-to, like beyond writing or YouTubing or anything like that.
And that's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you for watching, and I really hope you have enjoyed this interview with the Amazon best-selling author and YouTube sensation, Antoine Bandele. Like, comment, and hit that subscribe button, and tell me, what did you think of the interview? Do you agree that Antoine is positive, engaging, and prolific? In the description below, I have left links to Antoine's books, his website, his social media accounts, and to his YouTube channel. If you enjoy reading the fantasy genre, regardless of whether you like adventure fantasy, YA fantasy, African American fantasy, or dark fantasy, Antoine has something for you, so check out his books. Plus, if you enjoy watching geek-related content, particularly surrounding Avatar: The Last Airbender, then check out and subscribe to Antoine's YouTube channel now. Moreover, my debut fantasy novella, The Sultan's Daughter, is out. If you are looking for a book that is short, fast-paced, and full of suspense, then check it out. I have left a link for the book in the description below as well. Otherwise, until next time, keep well. Once again, guys, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching my video. I really appreciate it and I hope you've enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button and then you will be the first to receive more awesome content from my channel, and I hope to see you again soon.